What's up, y'all? You are listening to the Chain Reaction Podcast. Hey, I'm Jeremiah.
Thank you.
Welcome.
And I'm Andre.
Andre.
How's it going?
Good to see you, man. Thanks for watching and listening, people. We appreciate it. This is episode 1, so you can expect it to be awkward and interesting, and we'll get better as time goes on. That's the plan, at least.
Yeah.
It usually happens. We'll go on a month-by-month basis instead of a week-to-week. As far as what you can expect from the show today, we're not quite sure, but it'll be interesting. We're going to talk a little bit about ownership, a little bit about a news story, and before that, just basic introductions. Andre, tell us a little bit about yourself, please.
There really isn't much to tell.
Right, I knew it would be brief.
Basically, I am a 34-year-old anarchist. I'm just a regular working guy. You may know me from talking shit on the internet. But basically, I'm just a regular guy that wants to live as freely as possible without any interference or threats on my life.
Those are pretty high expectations.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how did you become an anarchist? Tell us a little bit about your story, your entry point. I know you were born that way, but then you transition out of it with enough propaganda.
Right. I actually had a weird kind of journey to where I am now.
Yeah.
I remember moving to DC around the time when Obama was running for his first term, and at the time I felt really odd that I was just, out in DC, out in the middle of where everything political happens, and I just wasn't politically involved in any way, and I just had no idea what was going on. So I started to try to really pay close attention to everything, and I just dove head deep into all of that. And
Yeah.
the deeper I got into it, the more I realized that this guy really was no good. But I still wasn't fully there because, around that time I basically became like a damn Republican,
Yep.
which is very odd. But the more I read, because that's what what really kind of threw me over the edge. The more I read, the less everything started, things just made a lot less sense to me, just in general.
Like politics or
Yeah.
republicanism? Yeah.
Yeah, all of it, because
Why did it make less sense?
well, I started to step back and see the bigger picture that the things that the Democrats are screaming at the Republicans for, and the things the Republicans are screaming at the Democrats for, are basically the same things. They all want the same exact thing. Just one has a red tie, one has a blue tie.
Yeah.
It all comes down to them stealing your money and deciding on what to do with it. And the only thing that they actually disagree on is what to do with your money after they steal it. And once that kind of clicked, then I was just like, I see no point in really paying attention to any of this at all, except for entertainment value. And my life is so much better for it.
Yeah. WWE is kind of what it's like.
Yeah, with the old ugly people.
You make an interesting point. Like, when growing up, and I think the message of the culture a lot of the times is that the red tie and the blue tie are exact opposites, when really they're dressed in the same suit. They just have moderately different colors on one specific area.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, they both preach to, their preferred crowd, and they say the things that their preferred crowd wants to hear. But even when they're talking to their crowds, they're lying, because, whenever any politician talks, you can tell exactly what side of the aisle they're on, so to speak, by the kind of keywords that they use. When they're talking about freedom and America being strong and, being fiscally conservative, you can tell where they're at. And then when you hear people talking about, how, there should be more free shit, and that all white people are racist and blah 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 blah, then you know what side that they're on, and
Yeah.
and it's never about those things. Like
And
it's
every
really,
side always misrepresents the other, you know? I mean, if
yeah,
you want more military, that's you wanting more free shit too. It's just for different stuff.
exactly. Yeah, they just it's just all these massive welfare programs that they're supporting, and it's just their preferred program that they want to support. So you want to throw money at schools and keep raising tuition prices that way because they know they have that money that is just always going to come to them. So why not raise a price if they can get an increase on what you're giving to them? You know,
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, all about getting the free stuff, all about using violence on others to pay for the stuff that you want.
yeah.
The political versus the economic means.
hmm But the very I noticed one of the very smart tactics that they use is that, I mean, yes, it's just stealing out of one pocket and giving some of that back to, someone else's
Yeah.
pocket. But the way that they do it that's so ingenious is that they will they'll give it to someone, um they'll give it to someone who is in some sort of need. And then by doing that, then you automatically become the devil if you ever want to not have your money taken from that, you know.
Yeah. And Republicans do the same thing in a different way
Oh
with
yeah.
police and military. Like you're satanic, like you're saying, if you're not for sending tens of thousands more troops overseas because you don't think that people should be protected. You know, it's
Right.
very, very similar to defending the poor and the people who can't help themselves, that are weak without the military or poor without the government.
Right.
Yeah.
But you're completely evil if you even dare to point out that sending a bunch of armed people over to far away distant lands to kill and be killed for political interests, that's not actually protection.
Right.
That- you know like
Yeah,
you
it's
can't point
it's
those things out.
humorous. Yeah, it's so ridiculous. I mean, it gets increasingly ridiculous as I'm alive. I mean,
Yeah.
thinking that Saddam was a threat was one thing, but now it's Assad, Gaddafi, like people who are even more, even have even uh, better relationships with the U.S. historically, are being seen as these giant threats that have to be removed from power, when it's really just about political interests driven often by corporate interests.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's just all, it's business. Like really, that's all it is. It's business. Like most of these,
Political business.
yeah,
Yeah.
most of these guys they put into power because they get something out of it. And in the second that they decide they don't want to be controlled anymore, then well, suddenly a bunch of kids got kidnapped and we got to go bomb somebody, or somebody's cooking up the recipe for the Incredible Hulk. We got to go bomb to stop that from
Yeah.
happening.
All under the guise of some sort of humanitarian effort, when the
Yeah.
effects are so demonstrably anti-human. It always looks absurd in the end. And then they're like, oh well, we didn't know. We did the best with the information that we have. Like people trying to still justify the Iraq War when that so obviously destabilized the region in ways which resulted in a bunch of refugees.
Yeah,
Big-
and I think that was the plan all along.
Maybe.
I mean, dude,
I don't know,
think about
but
it. Turmoil's good for business. It's business.
I
I mean,
I don't
I mean,
I don't
and-
think politicians see that far into the future. So some might.
maybe-
I don't know. Whoop. Yeah.
Yeah.
We have no way of knowing. Getting
Yeah,
getting
true.
back to you a little bit. What was like the ultimate turning point, other than just a slow realization that they were the same? What kind of pushed you over the edge?
Um, you know, oddly enough, it was Alex Jones. After I
Oh
went through
no.
my Republican phase, like somehow I just kind of stumbled on that, and and it just became just funny listening to this absolute maniac just constantly go off on these people. But yeah, that was really what did it. And then it kind of
That's
was like a
interesting.
yeah, it was like a weird connect the dots thing after
Yeah.
that, because then I remember he had Ron Paul on, and I didn't really know who he was at the time, so I started looking into him. And then there were certain people that he would always mention, like Rothbard, Mises, and then I would start looking into them. And I just fell down that rabbit hole.
Yeah. Yeah, and Alex Jones, correct me if I'm wrong, I haven't really listened to him, but he's not an anarchist. He's pretty
No,
statist, and
no.
isn't he kind of, other than his conspiracy theory stuff, kind of like the idealized version of a Republican
Yeah,
in terms of
absolutely.
like he is actually what a lot of Republicans claim to be to try to get elected. That's been my perception of him,
Yeah,
at least. But
yeah. That's
interesting.
basically him in a nutshell. I mean, he's not to be taken seriously.
No, no.
But I mean, he's 100% entertainment, though. I mean, it's, if you're having a bad day, that's definitely something to laugh at.
Yeah, I like I like one of the conspiracy theories I heard is that he's Bill Hicks or something like that. Have you heard that?
I've seen I've
Okay.
seen the photos, and
Okay.
it's strange.
Uh,
It's
yeah.
strange because what if, I mean, that would be like a comedic genius on a level never before seen, where somebody to jump into character for so long.
Yeah, like
Just
Andy Kaufman
yeah.
times 10. It's fantastic. Yeah, so I'm not that into conspiracy theories cuz it takes too long to figure out whether or not there's any validity to them, and I'd rather just point out the
Yeah.
the pretty obvious reality that by any reasonable standard of ethics or good and evil, the state is evil. And
Absolutely.
that is really difficult to counter as an argument. People just end up either explaining why it's right to own other people or trying to justify murdering people for exercising their basic human rights, like the right to self-defense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, because with conspiracy theory, it's, I mean, no matter the best possible result from diving deep into that is that you just end up with way more questions. And there are so many other things that we already have answers to. We can deal with
Yeah.
those. So,
Yeah,
you
I
know,
think some people find it entertaining, in which case,
yeah.
go for it. Sometimes the really helpful stuff comes out of it.
Oh yeah, and a lot
Yeah.
of times, some of these theories turned out to be absolute fact, but it's like you can't know until you know. So,
Yeah, it'd be nice if we had actual journalism going on
yeah.
in the world right now instead of a handful of journalists. There are more, but mainstream media is a mouthpiece for the state. Sometimes
Absolutely.
different parties, but they all end up doing the will of some politician or some political agenda.
Yeah. Yeah, they all have their own weird little agendas that fit perfectly in line with certain politicians, and I'm sure deals are made behind closed doors. Actually, I know for a fact now, since everything that's been exposed through WikiLeaks and the Clinton
Yeah.
campaign,
Yep.
working extremely closely with CNN, and even was it even the Colbert Report?
Yeah, I
Um,
heard that. I don't know if that's WikiLeaks or not, but that's a recent one I heard.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of, I mean, MSNBC, Vice, Vox,
yeah.
CNN, Times. I'm trying, there's like 50 different journalists, quote unquote,
Mhm.
that were revealed in WikiLeaks to have been working directly with the Clinton campaign. And that's just the emails from one guy
I
on
mean, not
one
just
server.
working with, not just working with. I mean, I have people at my place of employment that I work with. No, these people were in her pocket.
Yeah.
They were her personal PR team. Just crazy.
Yeah. The people who so many people get their news from, thinking this is the truth. This is objective reality and an unbiased opinion, or only moderately biased. But that perception is going away quickly. I was going to say, that's only what we know about from one person, one email server. That's going on with both parties, a bunch of different politicians, all the time, because for a lot of reasons I don't feel like getting into right now. Maybe we'll destroy the mainstream media on another episode and just explain how their incentive structure is all sorts of screwed up because of the state's involvement.
Yes.
I guess myself, I'll talk a little bit about me. How I got into anarchism originally. I grew up very, very conservative family, at least, kind of in terms of traditions and values. Very Republican, not small government when it came to war. I remember having a conversation. I can't even. Sorry, I was going to talk about a conversation with my dad, and it's pissing me off too much, and I can't do it. I grew up very Republican. Kind of. I was in a debate class in high school because I hated speech. Monologuing has always been a thing I've avoided until recently. I hated speech, so I was in a debate class, and I debated why it was likely, and explained why it was likely that Iraq had nuclear weapons, and why the U.S. needed to invade Iraq. So that's kind of peak Republican.
Were you wearing your American flag pants when you did it?
No, but I probably would have been one of the people who wanted to punch someone in the face for stomping on or burning a flag. Now I kind of enjoy it when people do it.
Yeah.
And give it the respect that a symbol representing the state deserves. And then later on, I became a follower of Jesus, which if you read the teachings of Jesus, and think about them honestly and reflect on how they impact your life, it requires that you become somewhat serious about violence and how you think about and relate to violence in the world. And around that time, I read a book by a guy named Greg Boyd called The Myth of a Christian Nation. And he kind of laid out in very layman's terms, and nowhere near as articulately or detailed as many anarchists do now, he laid out the violence that's kind of inherent in every state action, especially military action. And as a result of that, the world made a little more sense to me in terms of applying my Christian beliefs more consistently, and not wanting to be, or applying basic human ethics consistently, not wanting to be the kind of violent person who threatens other people with force in order to get what I want, and just realizing that that was just a part of every government action, and it was really impossible to have a state that reflected and looked like Jesus, because his ways were not similar to that. And that resulted in political apathy, which is better than being involved in politics as a Republican or a Democrat. In my opinion, I'd much rather people were apathetic. And then 2008, the market crashed. And I started realizing just how big of an effect, as I looked into why it crashed and stuff. It was just such a crazy time to have all these home prices going down, people's 401ks being wiped out, and it was confusing. And I was wondering what happened that the economy had such a huge slowdown that had such a negative effect on people. So I started looking into that, which no longer allowed me to be politically apathetic, because caring about people required I care about the causes of economic destruction, and the primary cause is aggression, specifically the state. So looking into that, I became politically interested, went back to sort of a more free market kind of Republican type person because it felt like there were only two alternatives still. Now I was even in my mid-20s probably. Did a lot of listening to Glenn Beck and Rush sometimes,
That's
Sean
what I'm
Hannity.
about.
Yeah. It makes the day go by.
Didn't want you just want to join the military when Glenn Beck was crying on TV like a little angel.
I made multiple trips to the recruiting office in high school. Just
So did I.
didn't sign my name, man. One of the best decisions I've ever made was
Yeah, I'm
not
not
doing
sure
something.
how I didn't end up going. Like
Yeah.
I almost joined the Marines. Oh my goodness, I'm so happy that didn't happen.
Yeah, good job. Way to not
Yeah.
do that. Mine is, yeah. I didn't really know what I thought about whether or not the U.S. enemies were my enemies. And I've never been very good at following orders I disagree with or that seem arbitrary, which makes you a poor fit for the military. Questioning
Yes.
supposed authority usually doesn't, is usually frowned upon a little bit there. So I thought I'll go a different route. That's probably better. I can always join later if I want to, but it's tough to unjoin.
Yeah, very.
Okay, so interest in Republicanism, and then Ron Paul, 2012. He introduced me, 2011 during his campaign, as he was just getting going. He introduced me basically to the idea of non-aggression, this notion that it is unethical to initiate force on others using physical violence, theft, or fraud. And I hadn't thought about that in terms of politics before. Obviously, that's generally the way that I live my life. I wasn't running around hitting people or taking their stuff. But the notion that you could apply the ethics that you use in your everyday life consistently rocked my world. And I just slowly supported less and less government until one day I was having a conversation with a friend and I was siding with decreasing the size of government. And then I was explaining to him how you could have roads in a free society, why security companies would be more effective and efficient at protecting people from violations of their body and property.
Come on, you know the truth. Without government, it'd just be a bunch of just rusty cars with spikes strapped onto the front, breathing fire out. People pointing guns at each other, telling them to just walk away. Just
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I say this nonsense up front, but inside I believe that if there wasn't this entity called government in existence, it'd just be a Mad Max world out there. I mean, I have a flamethrower in my basement right now, and a
I
grinder
got the
with
flesh
some metal.
mask ready.
Yeah. I have a welder with some spikes just ready to be thrown onto my vehicle as soon as we can get rid of this state. I can't wait to run a fool through. Yeah,
That's really what it is. We just want the state going so we can run amok.
it's such a funny perspective when the vast majority of people you interact with in your everyday life have no interest in stealing from you or harming you. They just
that's
don't.
the thing.
And there are some that do. And that tiny percentage, you need to have some way to defend yourself and defend others from. But they are not the majority. The fact that everyone is so, like almost everyone you talk to will put forth some sort of dystopian fear of the future like you're talking about with no evidence to support it, by the way.
They
The
made
fact
a
that they
movie
fear
about
that.
it.
Yeah, it means that they aren't that way. Like
Right.
they fear that small amount of people that are going to do that. But what do they think? I mean, what kind of people are they interacting with on a
Well,
daily basis?
you know
they,
what? I
that they
think-
imagine that. Yeah.
I think a lot of people are scared of what they might become. You know what I mean? Because, like you said, like most of the people that we interact with every day, we do so just fine without raping or murdering or stealing from each other. And yes, there are some out there that will do all of those things, but you know what? They're always going to be there. There's always going to be some people like that, and there will always be people that are willing to deal with them. We don't need a whole government for that. You know what I mean?
Well,
The reason
right.
why people aren't running around killing and stealing and strapping spikes to their cars and running over babies is because they don't want to. Honestly, if the people really wanted to do that, who would stop them? There's not enough. There's not enough military or police to stop people
No.
from doing that. And the reason it doesn't happen is because people are choosing not to do it. It has nothing to do with the presence of police or the threat of fines or jails or murder. Like people just don't want to live that like that.
Yeah, and I do think that the potential for justice or the potential for consequences that the police do provide does prevent some of that, but it's really easy to have and fund a force the size of a police force, or that's way more effective to
Absolutely.
to provide that exact same deterrent, and actually a lot better deterrent, and one that pleases consumers instead of being one that pleases the politicians and
Yeah,
provides
and
the most for the government instead of the people who actually need it.
yes, I'd like to point out one of the reasons why it would be much more effective and efficient is basically if they don't do a good job, they don't get paid. I mean,
Right.
or there are competing agencies that people can just take their money to. If you're going to risk losing that business, then chances are you're going to shape up, and if not, then you're gone. There is no bailout for you. You're just gone. So people want money. People want something of value, and they will do whatever it is that they need to do to get it. And if that means offering you a better service than the 30 other competitors that are in the market thirsty for your money, then
Yeah.
that's what they're going to do.
Man, Andre, we're really covering a lot of ground today. Just in bits and pieces. Eventually, we'll take time to expand on all this stuff, I think,
Yeah.
devoting a little more effort to it. All right. I yelled really loud in my mic. I'm pretty sure we peaked the audio on that one.
I didn't
what-
hear it come through. Did the limiter?
Skype moderates it pretty well.
Okay.
So I'm guessing Skype moderated it, and I'm guessing the podcast listeners, and specifically, are really going to get an earful in that moment. You're welcome, guys. Well, maybe we prevented it. I got a compressor going a little bit. One of the things that I want to do with this podcast is introduce people to great ideas from people, and some of the great authors or people who might not be that great of authors, but had some great authoring moments and presented quality stuff that is helpful to understand as an anarchist. And I'd like to start, and I don't have a good segue for any of these things. We'll figure one out in the future potentially.
Okay.
But otherwise, I'm just going to shove it down your throats a little bit, because I know a lot of you out there don't read.
Shove it down your throat as a microaggression.
Yeah, I'll shove it down your throat through your ears, specifically. A microaggression. I mean, if that's a microaggression, what's a macroaggression? That's awesome. Wow.
I'm sorry.
I thought spreading your legs was a microaggression. I'm really good about not aggressing that. I'll keep it very minimal. So long as sarcasm isn't considered aggression. So what I want to talk about today a little bit is the idea of ownership. If anyone's listening, hopefully a couple people do, and hopefully more people become interested in this podcast, and it will be spread more to people who aren't anarchists or are interested but not quite there. And one of the ideas essential to anarchy is the idea of ownership of one's own body and ownership of the things which they mix their labor with. That's Lockean. There's better ways of describing it, but they aren't in my head right now. So what I want to do is hopefully have a brief conversation about ownership using some thoughts from Murray Rothbard as a starting point. Rothbard, he is probably the most prolific libertarian author in the 20th century, at least. And he has an interesting way of coming to truths. It's somewhat common, but I really appreciate the way he does it. He talks in terms of Caruso economics or Caruso social philosophy. And this is he asks the reader to imagine a man named Robinson Crusoe. I believe that was a book I read at some point in my life, but I don't remember the details. But imagine he's alone on an island. And then when Rothbard talks about this using economics, it allows him to explain in very simple terms what capital is, what land factors are, what praxeology is, psychic value, things like this. But he also uses it in his book, The Ethics of Liberty, to talk about a social philosophy and to talk about the arising of natural law. And he asks the reader to imagine that Crusoe is alone on an island and he has amnesia. So he doesn't know anything. He doesn't have any memories of anything. And he takes us through a little bit of a journey in terms of what he discovers. And he finds that he thinks, and he finds that he analyzes things, and he finds that he needs to eat to live. And he finds that in order just to survive, he must interact with his environment. And then I'm going to read a couple of paragraphs from Rothbard. Maybe it will get too long and I'll have to cut it back next time, but we're figuring this out as we go. And when Rothbard's talking about this process of discovery, he goes into explaining how self-ownership arises naturally just by the nature of being human and examining yourself and your mind. He says, this process, this method necessary to man's survival and prosperity upon the earth, has often been derided as unduly or exclusively materialistic. But it should be clear that what has happened in this activity proper to man's nature is a fusion of spirit and matter. Man's mind, using the ideas it has learned, directs his energy in transforming and reshaping matter into ways which sustain and advance his wants and his life. Behind every produced good, behind every man-made transformation of natural resources, is an idea directing the effort, a manifestation of man's spirit. The individual man, in introspecting the fact of his own consciousness, also discovers the primordial natural fact of his freedom to choose, his freedom to use or not use his reason about any given subject. In short, the natural fact of his free will. He also discovers the natural fact of his mind's command over his body and its actions, that is, of his natural ownership over his self. So, essential to the idea of anarchism, Andre, you can feel free to jump in any time, is this idea of self-ownership. That's the beginning level of ownership. And some people object to this idea on the grounds that humans can't be owned, and it doesn't make sense to talk about humans as if they are owned at all, even owned by themselves. But we don't mean owned in terms of like a master-slave relationship or anything like that, or like a human owns himself as if he's a slave to himself. When we talk about ownership in anarchist terms, it's about the interplay between humans, and it's about who has rightful jurisdiction over something. Right. And in this case, it's about rightful jurisdiction over one's own body. Who has rightful jurisdiction over your body? It's you. It's not someone else. So when we talk about ownership, it's who who is morally allowed, rightfully allowed, to decide what happens with object A or person B?
Well, I think more importantly, it's who gets to deny someone else from interacting with another person in a certain way. Because, just you owning yourself, you can't decide that, well, since I own this body, I can do whatever I want with it, and I can go punch an old lady in the face, because it's my body, I own it.
Right.
But you can decide that since this is my body and I own it and I have the ultimate say so over what happens to this body, that the money that you have in your pocket belongs to you and someone else can't have it.
Yeah.
Or a skill that you might possess, that you have a right to deny using that skill for another person. I mean, even if they're in need of that skill, I mean, ultimately it's, you might
Yeah.
be a dick if you don't help a person out, but ultimately it's up to you to say no, because
Yes.
nobody can really force those things on you.
Yeah, you bring up a good point, that the natural boundaries that come from understanding self-ownership. Like you're saying, you don't go hit an old lady, because if you would go hit an old lady, then you would be deciding what happens with her body,
Exactly.
and thus violating her self-ownership. And you would be really exercising ownership over her and what is rightfully hers. And that
Right.
that is
Because
not
you're
fundamentally
deciding for that person
Yes.
what happens to them without their say so. And that is a direct violation of someone else's property rights.
Yeah, the exercise of ownership over other people, whether it's hitting them or, like you were saying, using violence or some form of force to make them use their skill to help you, is not fundamentally different than enslavement of a person. It's not the same as chattel slavery, in the U.S. and the 1800s. It's different in form and certainly less extreme, but
It's different in degree.
Yeah,
But,
yep.
I mean, it's the same thing. It's just to a lesser degree.
Yep, variations on that. So what we find is that when we look at our own minds and our own bodies, we find that, like, if we're in this Crusoe situation, we find that we are the ones who are in control. I'm in control of what my hand is doing right now and what my mouth is doing. It is inalienable, is what the founder said in the Declaration, and similar to what Rothbard says. My self-ownership is inalienable. No one else can actually decide what I do with my own body. And it arises then as a natural law. It's inescapable.
Yeah, it really is. And it just makes sense. This isn't something that you need a great philosopher to break down either. I mean, although Rothbard is, he was amazing, but this is just something that everybody just knows. And anybody that wants to claim that they don't just inherently understand this is a liar.
Yeah.
Like, because there are certain things like being punched in the face, being stolen from, being kidnapped, being locked in a cage, like all of these things. There are certain things that nobody wants to have happen to them.
Exactly.
And because it's wrong. So you have to know that it's wrong for you to do any of those things to another person, to violate their property in any type of way that you wouldn't want your person or property to be violated.
Yeah, like you're saying, it's one of those things that doesn't need to be explained to a thinking individual about what happens to them, but it does need to be explained to many individuals, especially in regards to the state, when it's about what happens to others. Everyone thinks it's wrong when they get, punched or stolen from, if it's out of nowhere, barring any previous interaction that was negative, but everyone feels how wrong it is when some form of aggression happens to them and some violation of their self-ownership occurs.
It's a very infantile state that people don't seem to grow out of. What I mean is, you can take any toddler playing with a toy and walk over to the toddler and snatch the toy away from them, and they will flip. But that same toddler might walk over to another kid at some other point and just take the toy from them because, for some reason they only understand it as it applies to them, but they can't, they haven't really developed the maturity or the understanding to get that, it's also wrong to do this to another person because that way you felt when somebody took something from you, that's the way somebody else is feeling right now. So, you don't want to make people, you don't want to put people in the same position that you don't want to be in yourself.
Right. And there's still the toddlers and kids are taught to apply ownership inconsistently. They are taught that there is a group of people that has authority based upon whatever they say. It's usually incredibly arbitrary and not based in ethics at all, their claims of authority. Someone else has the right, the moral right, to exercise ownership over you using coercion. And that it can be teachers, it can be police, it can be parents, it's usually some form of the state where you're propagandized from a toddler. And part of the reason why I think you don't grow out of it is that you're taught an inconsistent application of the idea of ownership.
Yeah. And I don't mean to get all Molyneux, but I mean, he does have a good point. I think a lot of this starts at home with the parents. I mean, you know how many times as a child I was told, don't hit people. Like, what kind of sense does that make?
Yeah. Yeah. If people aren't behaving the way you want them to, don't hit them. Smack.
Right. And that was the thing that really messed with me because it was using all of the things that I wasn't supposed to do as teaching tools for me to not do it. So you're telling me that, I mean, basically what it all boiled down to was, all of the things that you're doing is wrong, but I'm going to show you through my example instead of my words and actions that using violence against people is a very good and effective way to get what you want out of life.
Yeah. Yeah. And almost every parent, one of the things that they say, I don't know, a lot of parents at least, one of the things that I've heard so many of them say.
Don't say it.
What? I don't know.
I got beaten. I turned out fine.
Not that. Is I'm pointing out a different hypocrisy. Is that the kids will imitate your behavior and not rather than do what you say, and then they go and teach kids the worst kind of but pretty bad antisocial behavior that if you imitated the way how parents treat their kids, if their kids go on to imitate that in their daily lives, they are seen as and are being bad people, interacting with others in destructive and selfish ways because others happen to be inconveniencing them at the time.
Yeah. And a lot of these parents really are just in such denial about the way that they're raising their kids. I remember a study where they were trying to figure out the effects of hitting children, and they spent some time with the children, and then they spent a lot of time with the parents. And one thing that all of the parents had in common was that when they were asked, how often do you beat your children? They all would say, oh, I mean, maybe once in a while I give them a little pat on the cheek or something.
Yeah.
And they would have, cameras kind of following these people around and installed in their house. And what they showed was quite different. Like these people were constantly hitting their children, constantly beating them. I mean, just slapping, leaving red marks, like several times a day. But somehow in their mind, because I really don't think that they were lying, like they really didn't see it as them hitting their child very often.
Right.
Like, so it would be impossible for them to really understand the effect that they're having on their child when they when they can't even accept what they're actually doing to their children in the first place.
Yeah, they just think they're getting through their day and interacting with their children as normal. And it's such a regular occurrence in their life that they don't realize they're doing it. And they knew
Yeah.
that they were being recorded. If it's the same one I'm thinking of, I think they had an audio recorder on their person
Yeah.
during the multiple weeks of the study or whatever it was.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's get back to ownership real quick. We'll see if we can do 5 minutes. What Rothbard concludes this chapter with this sentence, which I like it. It has a lot of detail in it without in a very concise way. He says that Caruso, in natural fact, owns his self and the extension of his self into the material world, neither more nor less. So it's not only this idea of self-ownership, and I don't know how much we can get into ownership of property, but I'd like to at least mention it. It's that when you own yourself, you also own your actions and your labor and the product of your actions in the world, the result of what you do. And that has to do with morality. You own the consequences of your actions when you harm other people. You are morally responsible. But it also has to do with how you interact with land, including things like trees or natural resources and food. You own the result of your interactions with those things. And what Rothbard describes that ownership as is a natural extension of the self. One way, I can't remember who puts it this way. It might be Murray again. He's a good one, but he talks about eating and the process of eating. When you grab a fruit off the tree and eat it, it then becomes a part of your body. And it's obvious that it is the food, when it's digested, becomes the self. So if you own yourself, then you obviously own the food that becomes yourself. But then he goes on to ask the question, at what point do you own the food? Is it only when it's fully digested in your body? Or is it sooner, like when you grab it off the tree? And you can keep bringing that extension back to the point of ownership of land in larger areas of property. If we talk about when would it be a theft? When would it be a violation of self-ownership to take the apple from someone that he picks off the tree? Would it be after it's digested and it became a part of someone's skin and he cut off a part of the skin? Would it be the point where it's in the stomach, or when he grabbed it off the tree? Or we can push it back, or what if the man grew the tree himself? Or what if the man trimmed the tree in order to make it produce more fruit that he can put into his body to sustain his life? Or put a fence around it to prevent animals from going? At what point is it not theft? Is it not a violation of self-ownership to take the product of this man's stuff? Well, it depends upon the extent of his labor. But I think that if we spend more time in conversation talking about this at some point, I think it becomes clear that if someone takes a bite of an apple and you reach your hand down into their stomach and remove the apple from the bite of the apple from their stomach, that is as much theft as if you went onto their property, hopped their fence, and just grabbed the apple off the tree. Because you are still taking from this person the product of their labor that they need to survive or have put in place for the purposes of their body. It's a further off extension of their self, the apple on the tree, but it's still a natural extension of one's own body by being the product of man mixing his labor with the land.
Yes.
All right.
Also, you'll probably kill that guy by sticking your hand down his throat.
That's a fair point. Yeah, I mean, some people have really small hands. Thin arms. I don't know. I have a baby. He has very, very thin hands right now. he could probably reach down and grab it without.
Yeah, make him do it. He won't.
Yeah,
Remember.
yeah. I'll do an experiment later, and maybe I'll be back next week. Maybe not. Did that make sense, Andre? Was that reasonable? Okay.
No, absolutely.
Yeah. Cool. Anything else you want to say about property ownership?
I mean, really, it's all very self-explanatory, honestly. I mean, if you own yourself and you own the, you own what you produce. I mean, I really can't say much more than what's been covered already because it's so simple. But I think the only real issue is that people don't understand that things like property that they apply universally.
Yeah.
I think that's where the disconnect is they understand it perfectly as it applies to themselves, but they can't understand that it just applies, period. Not just to them, not depending on the mood, not depending on what bill can get passed. It just applies. Yeah, like it's consistency.
And if they don't apply universally, then they don't really apply at all.
Right.
You made me think of more stuff that I want to talk about regarding it.
Go.
One of the underlying assumptions of this idea of people being able to own property is the idea that land and when I say land, I mean everything from the earth that is not human. That includes animals, and that includes oil, and that includes trees and the dirt. That's what I mean by land. It's a all very inclusive term, not necessarily the way we always think about it, but it's the way Austrian economists generally talk about it, which shapes my thinking. One of the assumptions is that land can be owned by people, and the other assumption is that first use of the land is the way that ownership should be determined. That if Crusoe puts a fence around a tree that he trimmed and uses for his food production, and someone else comes and says, oh no, that's mine, it's because he came to it first, it is rightfully his. And this shows itself to be obviously true, I think, when we examine the alternatives. One, when Crusoe is claiming and exercising ownership over that tree, everyone involved, every individual involved consents completely to what's going on. It is only after Crusoe comes to own that someone else can come in and violate his consent. But when the initial ownership act is completely consensual with all parties involved, is when ownership can be rightfully acquired. And when there are no other parties involved, then ownership is definitely consensual. Right. But there are some alternative views that some people hold, that land either can't be owned by people or that land is owned by all people. And these are absurd on their face, because when we talk about ownership, it's a moral jurisdiction, a moral right to decide what happens with a piece of property, whether that's yourself or a land factor. And if no one can own land, then the only ethical way to be a human is to be born, float in the air without getting on dirt, and then die of starvation. Because it would be immoral for you to use any of the land because you have no moral jurisdiction over it. And then if everyone owns the land, it functionally ends up being no one owning the land. If all land is rightfully owned by humans as some sort of whole collective, then in order to use the land at all to meet your own needs for survival, you would need to get permission from every other human in existence. That would be the only moral way to do it, which would mean that you wouldn't really ever be able to survive functionally. There'd be no rightful way of doing it.
Yeah, there'd be no incentive to take care of the land either.
Yeah. Yeah, even no one functions, even complete communists, in a complete collective ownership paradigm, like you're saying. But the more you do, the less incentive there is for individuals to care for the land and make sure that it continues to meet their needs in the future. All right, I feel like that was a somewhat reasonable explanation of ownership, decent foundation. Let us... Andre is going to be bringing you guys a little news story article.
Oh my goodness, I was just thinking, like, we need like the news jingle.
Yeah, I might get a better one sometime. That's something.
No, I'd love that news jingle because I've heard that in so many different places. I'd love it.
I have a whole thing of sound effects that I don't know how to use or what context I would use them in. But I mean, I have a lot of random stuff. I mean, we could do this one.
And his name is John C.
I have no idea when that would be relevant, but I like it.
Oh, that's
an
always
obscure
relevant.
reference to a radio call-in show, playing a prank. All right, tell us your article, Andre. You're going to talk about.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so I read an article last week by Angela Buckingham. She wrote an article called "Murder in VR Should Be Illegal." Within the article, she goes into explaining that, well, we just don't know. Putting these goggles on your head and being able to raise your little hand device and pretend shoot somebody and then see, some pixely thing shake and then drop to the ground. It's going to eventually turn you into a killer after you do this enough. And we get these lunatics that come out and say this crap like every couple months or at least every year or so.
Yeah.
I remember like back in the day, there was Tipper Gore was going on her little tirade against gangster rap music and, smashing cassette tapes because, she said that the music was turning people violent. And that's really debatable because, I mean, there've been so many studies that show that the music isn't actually what turns people violent. I mean, chances are people that already, are feeling a certain way tend to listen to music that matches their mood.
Absolutely. So, I'm a violent person, and that's why I want to listen to music that makes me mosh.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember when I was a little ruffian, and there was the plan to go and beat somebody up because I wasn't always an anarchist.
Right.
We would do the typical hype thing, and we would be on our way to go fight another group of people, and then we would just play the angriest shit that we could find on our way to go get amped up for this fight. Or I had a devastating breakup. I would listen to sad music that made me want to kill myself. So
go
it's
Dashboard
really,
Confessional.
Yeah. So it's really just, people pick forms of entertainment that match their moods, and it helps them to deal with the mood. It's not the other way around where you're just kind of going along minding your business like da-dee-da-dee-da, and then the next song that comes on the radio is about killing somebody, and the next thing you know, you're slitting somebody's throat. Like that doesn't happen. And they did the same thing. They went after Marilyn Manson with this crap. They went after Eminem with this crap. They've been trying to go after the gaming industry with this crap for a very, very, very long time, and it hasn't stuck yet. I feel like at some point it might, because last I checked, the gaming industry is making more than the movie industry. And of course, government's got to get their cut of that. So there's going to be some cry for help. We've got to get involved somehow, because think of the children. But anyway, so this lady is saying that, oh, well, maybe not right now, but as the games become more realistic looking, that it's going to have adverse effects on the minds of people, which is which has been shown to be false. I mean, they were saying this about Grand Theft Auto, and
Right.
that never happened. Actually, I believe when Grand Theft Auto 3 came out, and then for a while, every single time a new Madden came out, crime would decrease because
Yeah.
people weren't out starting shit because they were bored and it's too hot in the summer and there's nothing to do. They were all in the house playing the game. Like, you know, so if anything, if these people are pouring hundreds of hours into games, well, that's hundreds of hours that they're not wandering the streets being bored, getting into trouble. And then by the time they do turn the game off and they go out into the street, they're not suddenly thinking that they're living in Grand Theft Auto and
Yeah.
they're just going to run up and snatch somebody out the car and then stumble into the driver's seat because the controls are messed up. Like it's like just real life just doesn't work like that. But you know, this is just another alarmist cry for the government to intervene. And the thing that bothers me the most about it is that, so she's saying, I don't really know if it's going to do this or not, but you know, the problem is that nobody knows, so it should just be illegal just in case anyway until we can figure something out.
Right. Right.
So-
the sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say the numbers show that since video games came about, interpersonal violence has been decreasing in the US. That is not a causal relationship, I don't believe. I think maybe there's probably something to the new video game release stuff, but that I don't believe that's a large cause of, you know, a decrease in interpersonal violence. But there's no evidence that there is any sort of widespread issue that violence is increasing due to video games, because as
Right.
they get more realistic and more prevalent, interpersonal violence continues to, over, you know, decades, go down.
Yeah. And another thing that pissed me off about this article is that she's pointing to recent mass shooters. And she's like, well, I don't really know if games make you violent, but you know, this guy killed some people and that guy killed some people, and guess what? They played video games. So it's, you know, it's just bullshit. It's just assumption piled on top of.
How many
of a
video
s-
games do you think they're playing in Syria right now? You think that's probably the cause of the conflict?
You know, that's
all
probably
those
what it
games.
is.
Yeah,
That's probably what it is.
yeah. They're way
United
ahead of
States
the
decided
U.S.
to
in
just-
VR.
Yeah, they just decided to just drop a bunch of, you know, PS4s and VR sets.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then they're just give
Call
them a
of
couple
Duty.
months, they'll all be dead. Like,
Right.
But the thing that really bothers me more than anything else about this article is her calling for it to be illegal. Now, when
Yes.
when something is illegal, like when you break it down to its simplest form, something being illegal means that you can't do or say or drive or whatever it is, the thing that we don't want you to do. You cannot do this thing, or there is a chance that we will murder you for it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's always what it comes down to, because, you know, if there wasn't a threat of death for doing something, then it would just be a suggestion. But when you say something
Yeah.
is illegal, then that means we can come after you. And if you decide that, you know, this is bullshit, I'm just playing my little VR headset. Like,
Yeah.
like,
If you
know, I'm-
decide to exercise ownership over your own property, they'll murder you if they don't like what you're
Right.
doing.
right.
Yeah.
If you defend against that in any way, you will be shot dead. And the people that killed you will be celebrated as heroes.
And defense
Like-
is simply an exercise of ownership. Like,
Right.
along with owning your property is the right to prevent others from violating it.
Exactly. So like when, you know, like when the police decide to come and drag you away for something idiotic and you say no,
Yeah.
then you know, all of these state worshipers, I mean, you see it in the comment section of the articles all the time. When something happens to somebody, they say, well, the officer said to turn around and he didn't turn around. Okay, so
Fuck the
because
police
somebody,
coming straight from the underground. A young nigga got it bad cause I'm brown.
How's that?
right.
All right.
That's right. I mean,
I like
it-
surprising you.
No, that was great. But I mean, it applies to everybody. Like, you see them in the comment section, they say, "Oh, well, he said do something and then he didn't do it." I mean, how insane is that? Like, what
crazy.
makes this person so much different than another person just because he has a badge and a ridiculous costume on? Imagine if I walked down on the street and I said, "Turn around" to some random person and they didn't, and then I shot them for it. Like
And
that.
you were dressed as Darth Vader, and you said it's fine.
Oh, well, I have to have
I'm
some
in
type
charge,
of
yeah.
uniform on.
Yeah, absolutely.
That makes it official. It's not murder now because I have a uniform.
Yeah, a lot of people like to think that the laws are backed by fines, but they're not, because if you don't pay the fines, they'll come try to lock you in a cage. And then a lot of people like to think that the laws are backed because people will be locked in a cage if they don't obey them. But the reality is that's the reason why people voluntarily go along with being locked in the cage is because the laws are backed by murder. It's
Yes.
because if they could resist and not be locked in a cage, they would. But they don't resist because the motivating factor is their own death at the hands of the thugs of the state, aka law enforcers.
Yeah, anybody who doesn't admit that is lying because they. I mean, it's
It's
so
tough to admit.
clear.
It's tough to
Yeah,
admit because
it is.
changes your whole worldview if you choose to be an ethical person.
And that's what it is. A lot of people like refuse to admit that what they believe is wrong because people hate
Yeah.
to be wrong. But that's all it is. It's backed by the threat of murder. Or like any type of law is backed by that, no matter how simple or small or insignificant it seems. It's all backed by murder. I remember
Yeah.
getting into an argument with I think the mother of an ex-girlfriend like a long time ago, and there was some law passed. I think somewhere in Jersey that you had to you couldn't sag your pants. Now I think it looks stupid.
Yeah, I remember
But
that.
it looks stupid, but I mean, just saying like now this is illegal because some people don't want to see it. Now this becomes violating someone else's property because now you're using basically a group of armed thugs to force your will onto somebody else because you didn't want to just avert your gaze 30 degrees, So
Yeah.
so I got into this debate with her, and I'm trying to break this down to her. I need her to understand what she's saying because she's reading this article and she was like, "Yeah, about time." And I'm like, and I'm going through the steps, and I'm like, "Really? So it's a good thing that it's illegal?" "Yeah, it's a good thing." "Okay, so do you think that somebody should be, roughed up if they have their pants hanging low?" And I'm like, "Well, they know the law." I'm like, "Okay, so what happens
crazy.
what happens if the cop grabs this person with his pants and then the cop ends up shooting him and he dies?" And it's just like, well, they should have just obeyed the law and it would have happened. I'm like, so it's okay for somebody to be murdered for having their pants down too far? Is that what you're saying? And she was like, I'm not saying that at all. I'm like, no, that's exactly what you're saying.
All right, Andre,
Yeah.
your video froze, but your
no.
audio's still coming through. I think, the Skype after an hour just stops being convenient sometimes.
Oh,
But your audio's still coming through. Let's wrap things up because at 75 minutes I pee my pants.
yeah, me too.
Yeah, so much coffee. Anything else you want to make sure you say on that? Sorry for kind of interrupting you. I just wanted to.
No,
You
it's
know,
fine.
good.
I think
All
we're
right.
running long anyway.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, I basically summed it up. I mean, it's just I want people to be mindful of what it is that they're supporting when they're in support of something being made illegal.
Yeah.
Now,
exactly.
obviously, it's illegal to kill and stuff like that, but people aren't killing, for the most part because they don't want to. No law is going to stop people who want to kill from killing. But, simple things like, I mean, just anything that you can think of that isn't violent or isn't like
Yeah.
violation of somebody's
Yeah.
property.
Laws that
You cannot.
aren't about protecting property.
Yeah, you can't point a gun at somebody for doing those things just because you don't like them.
Yeah. You can, but you're a dick if you do.
Yeah, there you go.
All right. Andre, you wanna tell people where they can find you at if they want to follow your stuff?
You can find me on Twitter. My handle is at iStackSilver. I believe it is. I hardly ever see it.
Yeah, it is.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
You can find me on YouTube. Wow. I forget where I'm at. Oh,
I think he's
it's probably
iStackSilver.
iStackSilver. Yeah.
We'll throw links in the YouTube video and the post page when we get one up for the podcast. But
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, basically I talk a lot of shit on YouTube. So if you're into that, come check me out.
all right, cool.
And also any gamers, if you have PS4s, because they're better than Xboxes, you can hit me up on PSN. My PSN ID is also iStackSilver.
Sweet. All right. As far as this show, you can follow us on Twitter at Chain Reaction. The T in reaction is a 1. That's the closest I could get to actually having that, which is not so bad this far into the life of Twitter. We also have a Facebook page that I don't do much with, but maybe some other people are better at that than I. And you can check us out at the Chain Reaction Podcast is the page name on Facebook. As far as my stuff, in case you are a Christian who is interested in anarchy, I have a 50-some episode podcast. It's mostly presentation style, so a little different than this. And it's every episode except 3 or 4 are audio only, but you can search Christian Anarchy Podcast on iTunes and find that. If that interests you, you can follow me on Twitter at JeremiahJM, and don't follow me on Facebook. I'm there, but I usually avoid going there.
Follow him.
Don't do it. You can expect us, or not us, me and a guy inconveniently named Jeremiah next week at 6 p.m. Central, which is my time zone. You guys are smart enough to know how time zones work to figure out the rest of that. Thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate you listening. I hope you'll be back next week. And like I said, I promise that over time we'll continue to get better and more entertaining. Let us know what you thought. Share this with your friends if you want. All right.
Yeah.
Until next time, y'all. Free the markets.
Fuck this state.